In 2019, 44% of the workforce, 53 million Americans, worked in jobs where the median pay was less than $20,000. If the audience in this conference was a representative of the American workforce, almost half of you listening would be struggling to make ends meet at the end of the month. 40% of Americans can't cover a $400 emergency expense. Now, the problem of too many people being left behind with low wages is not a new problem. And it's not going away anytime soon. When we think about future of work, well, it looks more like more low-wage work. Job growth is expected to come from largely low-wage settings. It's people like caregivers, restaurant workers, janitors, and cleaners. And those of us concerned about social injustice, minorities and women are overrepresented in low-wage jobs. Now, we know that pay is not the only thing that makes a job a good job, right? Sense of achievement, meaning, belonging, recognition, those are really the things that drive motivation and engagement. We also know that pay alone doesn't necessarily mean high performance for organizations. I am a business school professor. My field is operations management. I care about productivity, quality, continuous improvement. Why is it then I start with pay? Well, the first reason is because without sufficient pay, operational mediocrity is guaranteed. I'll share with you evidence from both my academic research and work at nonprofit Good Jobs Institute during the last 5 years. And then the second reason is because those of us who make more than enough money to make ends meet often underappreciate the importance of pay for workers' well-being and their ability to do a good job. Now, let's look at some numbers. How good is $15 an hour? Well, $15 an hour amounts to $31,200 a year. And that is not a living wage for most families in the United States. Now, let's take a look. If you're a single parent and you're making $15 an hour in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you work 40 hours a week every single week, and we know, those of you who study service industries know that many service workers are not able to consistently work 40 hours a week every single week. So even if you do that, every month you are short $451. Just looking at 5 basic expenses: food, transportation, rent, childcare, medical. Now notice that this calculation does not even count personal care. It doesn't count housekeeping supplies, phone, internet, no savings, no emergencies. You're still $451 short every month. Now, if you're in a household with 2 parents, both of them working, with 2 children, you still can't make it on $15 an hour. When we work with companies through the Good Jobs Institute, we help them calculate how many of their full-time employees, not part-timers, but full-time employees, make a living wage. When they present the results, there's often silence in the room. When they see how many of their employees are not able to make a living wage, there is silence in the room. Then someone raises their hand and they start a sentence with, "I had no idea." And they say, "I had no idea that so many people were struggling in our own company." They're surprised because their point of reference had always been market wages, right? They thought that as long as they paid the market or slightly above the market, things will be fine. But things aren't fine. They aren't fine for workers, and they aren't fine for their companies when the market is a low-wage market. Let me just show you more data. So what happens when workers don't make enough to cover their expenses? There's a long literature that links low pay with worse physical health, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, worse mental health, and worse cognitive functioning. When you're constantly thinking about money, how to make ends meet, what to pay and what not to pay, your IQ literally drops 13 points. So not surprisingly, workers can't focus on the job. Their productivity is low. They make more mistakes. They have attendance problems. And then they can't move up in the organization and they find themselves in a vicious cycle of poverty. Now, from the company perspective, all this means is that when there's low pay, there's people instability, low ability, high employee turnover, and poor attendance. And then when there's people instability, there are all sorts of operational problems. And that's exactly what I saw in my research starting in 1997. When I started my research looking at retail supply chains more than 20 years ago, my colleagues and I found that retail stores were full of operational problems, misplaced products, inaccurate inventory data. These problems were expensive. They cost companies a lot of money. When I looked into why these problems happen all the time, stores that had high employee turnover had more problems. Stores that had understaffing had more problems. Retailers, just like their workers, were operating in their own vicious cycle. And what I found in my research is that this vicious cycle is expensive for companies. It leads to lower sales, it leads to higher costs, it leads to lower productivity. But there's so much more than immediate financial costs of the system. When companies operate in a vicious cycle, they end up creating an entire system that ends up being a quite weak system. Let me just give you one quick example. In a vicious cycle, and those of you who operate in these environments know exactly what I'm talking about, managers, unit managers are constantly fighting fires. Even if your company has the best hiring practices on paper, there is no time to hire the right people. There is no time to train them well. There is no time to develop them. Now, when you haven't hired the right people and trained them well, when you see them making mistakes all the time because they can't focus on the job, would you trust them to make decisions for your customers? It's hard to trust them, isn't it? And that's why so many of these companies, when they operate with low pay and high turnover, they end up putting so many controls into their system. And that ends up making their system a lot more inhumane than they ever intended. We can do so much better. We can do so much better for companies. We can do so much better for workers. We can do so much better for our society. And it doesn't even have to come at the expense of higher prices for customers. Let me give you examples, because there are some companies in the world that are already doing this. One example is Costco, one of the world's largest retailers. Costco thrives by paying their employees a lot more than their competitors do. Their average wage is about $25 an hour. Employees at Costco see the job as a career, not just a job. At Quick Trip, a convenience store chain with gas stations, as a full-timer, you can make more than $40,000 in your first year. And just like Costco, Quick Trip operates with incredibly low turnover compared to others in their industry. And their employees move up in the organization because the company promotes 100% up from within. And it's not just these two companies that were almost born this way. During the last couple of years, we have seen companies like Mudbay, which is a regional pet product chain in the Northwest, and Sam's Club raising pay without lowering their profitability or increasing prices. Now, the question is, how do they do it, right? How are these companies able to pay their employees more, provide their customers the lowest prices, and make a lot of money at the same time? Well, their big secret is that they make sure that they design the job in a way that enables that job to create more value. In particular, when I studied these companies like Quick Trip, Costco, Mercadona, Spain's largest supermarket, and Trader Joe's, I found that they make 4 specific operational choices. And each of these choices is a chapter in my book, so I'm not going to go through these choices. But what I will say is that these 4 choices, each one of them, enable higher pay by increasing the productivity, contribution, and motivation of employees. And then those same operational choices also require people investment. We talked about empowerment, right? You can't empower employees if you haven't invested in them, if you operate with high employee turnover. talk about operate with Slack. Operate with Slack refers to having enough people to get all the work done and take care of the customer. But you can't operate with Slack if you have slackers. So this is a system that works together, and I call this system the good job strategy. And my mission in my work and at MIT Sloan and at Good Jobs Institute is to spread the good job strategy. When we talk about the future of work, to have more good jobs, we don't have to think of making our caregivers or cooks into computer programmers. The jobs that they already have are important jobs, and they are essential jobs to the functioning of our economy. These existing jobs can be good jobs. It's possible, it's profitable, and it's very much worth the effort.
Zeynep, thank you for that talk. It's been fun to read your work, and I find it very compelling. I suspect a lot of our audience finds it compelling. It's easier for me, though, I think, because I'm not having to make these decisions with real people. I don't have to meet payroll. I'm curious, in your work with organizations, especially with the Good Jobs Institute, how is this received? What kinds of people, what kinds of companies welcome you and are excited about it? And what kinds of people or what kind of situations are people much more skeptical and a little bit scared of what you're talking about?
So I co-founded Good Jobs Institute, Cade, 5 years ago. We just celebrated our 50-year anniversary. And we have worked with a wide range of companies, public companies and private companies, small companies, large companies, retailers, call centers, financial institutions, senior living organizations. And I think when it comes to the good job strategy, almost all of them find it compelling. They believe that if you combine operational choices with investment in people, it leads to better performance. But they have doubts about whether it could work in their companies. So to overcome those doubts, we work with them and we help them make the financial case, we help them make the competitive case, and we help them make the ethical case for change.
Mm-hmm. How long does it usually take to start bearing fruit? I mean, a lot of what you talk about feels like a short-term, long-term problem. You've written that the financial benefits of paying low are immediate, direct, and easy to measure, while the downside of paying low is, indirect, harder to measure, long-term. So how do you fight that kind of chronic issue of people are so short-term focused?
Yes, people are short-term focused. At the same time, and system change is difficult, right? Because this is not just about raising pay, right? It's raising pay and doing so many other things. Typically, when we do a workshop with a company, they'll have so many different things that they have to change. So to make this palatable, what changes you make first matters. You have to make changes so that you can get on a virtuous cycle of high performance early on. So you don't have to wait 5 years before you get the results. For example, Quest Diagnostics implemented the good job strategy in their call centers. They were able to see strong results within 18 months. Sam's Club, a huge retailer, $60 billion in sales, is in a journey for good job strategy. And within a year or two, they started seeing some results on their same-store sales growth, on their productivity, on their membership retention, on their employee turnover. So this is not a switch. You switch it on and you see the results in the next quarter, but it doesn't take, like, people get nervous about all the Toyota production system or lean improvements, right? Oh my God, this lean journey takes forever. What I've learned from leaders who made these changes, it doesn't take forever. You have to be smart about what changes you make first, and you have to think in systems, but it's very much doable in a reasonable amount of time.
What's the connection to hiring? What role does hiring play here? You said in your talk, you can't have slack if you have slackers. So is it all about converting and improving your current workforce, or is some part of it pulling in a different kind of worker?
Yeah, it's both. I mean, at Quest Diagnostic, when they implemented the good job strategy, one of the first things that they did, along with increasing pay, was increasing expectations. Now, 90% of their current employees, were fine with higher expectations. They were able to do the new work, but about 10% didn't make it, right? So hiring, it's a combination of both. You have to have the right people and you have to have the right systems. Thing is, there are so many people in the world, this is not brain surgery, that are capable, competent, and want to do a good job, if we give them the opportunities to do so.
You talk a lot about both the pay piece and the organizational practice piece, or the job design piece. And you wrapped up your presentation there talking about these 4 components of job design that turn out to be vital. Do companies reliably struggle more with any one of those than others? Is there one of them that's especially important, or is there one of them that is important to do early? How would you differentiate those 4?
Yeah, it is, the order really matters. For example, as I mentioned, you can't empower your employees if you don't have lower turnover, if you haven't simplified the work, if you don't give people enough time. So one of the things that we find is that one of the first things to do is that focus and simplify, re-articulate why do you exist in the eyes of your customers, and what are the trade-offs that you need to make, and then reduce the workload, reduce the variability in workload by removing all those non-value added things. Now, the benefit of this is that you're also reducing work, which means you can subsidize pay increases, right? Because when you increase pay, you won't be immediately seeing lower turnover. You won't immediately see higher productivity. So when you combine investment in people with focus and simplify is where we have seen the best results, because that enabled companies to get on a virtuous cycle. And then as they lower their turnover, as their processes are better, now they can start empowering their people. Now they have time for improvements. Now they can do some of the other things as well. So stability in operations and stability in people is where we start this process.
Okay. The conference, of course, is about future of work. And we were motivated to broaden the lens of the conference just with how many very important issues have emerged in the last 2 years. I mean, we've even seen what some people call the Great Resignation, which is very much would be a problem for those trying to kind of keep turnover down. How do you connect your work and your concept of good jobs with the changes we're seeing right now, whether it's more remote work, whether it's 4-day weeks, distributed teams? What connections do you think there are?
Yeah, I mean, the context that I study, Cade, tends to be the low-wage context where the work can't be done remotely, except for call centers, right? Retail workers have to go to the office. Care workers have to care for people. Restaurant workers have to be there. So remote work is not something that I've studied. But when you think about the future of work, what we see is that there are more low-wage jobs that are coming into the future of work, and we don't have a problem of the quantity of jobs, but we have a problem with the quality of jobs. And I think we should do everything possible, including automation, to make these jobs better jobs for human beings.
So you're not scared of automation ending people's jobs. You want to use automation to improve the quality of the job.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite examples of automation is Sam's Club. During the last couple of years, Sam's Club has implemented several changes, including, automating the tire buying process, including having an app called Ask Sam that helps workers know where products are, what the prices are. And all of these changes increase the productivity of workers, which enable them to raise pay and to provide jobs with more meaning and dignity. It also freed them up to focus on the customer. So automation, when it's done with a focus on the customer and increasing productivity, not like the so-so technologies where you just do it for cost saving, right? When automation is done right, it can be a great complement to creating good jobs.
All right. Listen, before I lose you, I want to ask about your journey in discovering these concepts and your journey as a researcher. And I'm asking it because the community that we're with today, some folks are essentially researchers. They're trying to figure out what's going on in their workforce. They're trying to figure out how to improve jobs within their organization. What do you think it was? What combination of behaviors or orientations, Zeynep, did you bring to your research that allowed you to see this particular set of ideas and see this problem and see some solutions? So you started out as this operations researcher, and so some of it was data, but it went beyond data at some point. I'm curious how you think about how you ended up where you are, because we have a bunch of folks who are trying to figure out their organizations. What skills, orientations, behaviors do you think are important?
I grew up in the doctoral program at Harvard Business School, where the questions we were encouraged to ask were business questions that you approach from multiple disciplines. I think maybe that may be disappearing more in our world of business. But there are amazing researchers, I think, like Paul McDuffie at Wharton, who is looking at things from a systems perspective. At MIT Sloan, we have systems. We have a group of researchers that are doing this. So I think as long as you have an open mind and are not scared about bothering some in your discipline.
I think that's the heart of your answer, is a systems orientation, a systems approach. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's a systems orientation. I'll expand this beyond academia, Cade. I work with private equity investors, for example, and they will ask me, what are the one or two things that we can do to make a change? Well, you can't do one or two things, right? You can't just increase pay. You can't just promote people. You have to design their work. You can't just do the work design right. You have to do the pay too. So I think we are all in our silos looking at things in isolation and fail to see that all else really matters. One great example is one company that we work with. They were so bought into the good job strategy, and they wanted to implement it in their organizations. And then they said, hey, we need to make a case for change. So we need data. Let's look at, and this is what we do in academia, right? We look at data, we look at historical data, see, what happened. So they looked at what happened the last time they increased pay in their organization, what happened to turnover, and what happened to their performance. And last time they increased pay, that's all they did, right? They didn't make the job better. They didn't simplify. They didn't work on stable schedules. Like, the only thing they did was pay. And what they found was that there's a link between pay and turnover, but it's a very tiny link. And if you improve pay, you reduce turnover by 5%. And then they concluded, hey, we can't do this. Now, in academia, we do the exact same analysis. We will look at pay in isolation and determine this is not working. When the world is way beyond, we need a lot more imagination to see that there are so many other things that are under our control that we can change to make a positive impact on workers and the company.
Terrific perspectives, Zeynep. Thank you very much for being with us today. Wish you the best with your work.
Thank you so much, Kate.